So the challenge in the readings, especially the first reading and the gospel, is a moment of not just decision, but also commitment. What I would like to do is first look at the readings. I think they are very important. Then I want to talk a little bit about, at the peril of my own soul, how husbands and wives should relate to each other. And then third, I want to say something coming back to the point of decision and commitment. First of all, the readings. The first reading is chosen, as it often is, to illuminate in some aspect the gospel. And there's this very dramatic moment when Joshua gathered all the people together, and he lays it out and he says, "Decide today, not tomorrow, decide today whom you will worship, either the idols or the true God." Now, this is a very dramatic moment, and it's one that's used in many movies. One of my favorite movies, The Magnificent Seven. You have a situation where people are called, "You're going to be part of this, we're going to help these poor peasants in this way or that way." A moment of decision. Make up your mind. What are you going to do? This way or that way? Decision comes from the Latin decidere, meaning to cut off. You decide to marry this person, that's going to exclude the other possibilities. I had a friend who entered the monastery and once said, "The reason I'm a celibate is I could never limit myself to one woman." He left the order. So this is the challenge, and it comes up in the gospel in the same way, where we're talking here, where Jesus, we're at the end of this long chapter 6 of the Gospel of John, where he gives this long reflection on the true bread of life. And here it says, he says, they're murmuring because it's a hard saying. And all of us, if we're at all alert, encounter hard sayings in our life. And certainly hard moments, difficult moments. But here he says something that could be confusing because he's been stressing throughout the readings or throughout this chapter, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you cannot be saved. People were rightly kind of going, I can't believe that he's demanding this. And even his own disciples in this, not just the crowd, but even his own disciples here were murmuring. And then he says to them, "It is the Spirit that gives life, while the flesh is of no avail." That can cause a lot of confusion because up until this point, he's saying, you got to eat my flesh. And now he says the flesh is of no avail. Has he gotten confused? No. Keep in mind, in Scripture, there are multiple meanings, and one of them is the Spirit is not just the mental or the non-material, especially as Paul uses the word. The Spirit is everything that is oriented in love, everything that is open to giving. It's all your best angels. That's what the Spirit is. And the flesh is the opposite. The flesh is not the body. The flesh is not the sins of sexual sins. The flesh, in this sense, is self-centered living. Self-centered living. So it's obvious that what he's saying here is if you follow self-centered living, the bread of life is not going to be helpful to you because the bread of life is broken and you lay down your life for others. That's a hard saying. Who wants to hear it? And it goes on, he says a few other things here. Here's a line that can easily be confused. He says, "For this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." What do you think of when you hear a line like that? No one can come to me unless it is granted to him by my Father. Well, some people have interpreted this as God grants it to some people, doesn't grant it to other people. Some people have a gift of faith and others don't. That's Calvinism. That's not Catholicism. Catholicism, God draws everyone. God invites everyone. Remember, we talk also about the entire issue of God's unconditional love. You hear that phrase. Just remember, it is conditional in one sense, not in the offer, but in the reception. God always offers. Everyone offers. But if that gift is to bear fruit, it's got to take root by saying, I accept. Or, as it says here in this text, I believe. So it's important to look at these texts and be careful with them. But I want to move to my second point, and that is the one at the peril of trying as a celibate to speak wise words about marriage. This reading from Ephesians is infamous. I remember 40 years ago, I was working on my dissertation. I had been ordained just a couple years. And every Tuesday at this university where I was, they had the Graduate School of Theology. And now if you're thinking about this, 1974, 75, question of feminism was especially intense and so on. So I get this phone call on a Monday afternoon. And this person I knew was a liturgical coordinator, and she said, can you do Mass tomorrow for all the faculty? Do Mass for faculty, hardest nuts to crack. And also the graduate students in theology. I said, yeah, I can do it. And she said, oh, thank you. I said, what's the problem? She said, you're the sixth priest I've asked, and you're the only one who accepted. I repeated my question, what is the problem? And she said, it's the first reading, which this Sunday is the second reading, about wives one of my friends says, wives should be subversive with their husbands, but wives be subordinate to your husband, so on. So I said, no, I'll do it. And a very good friend, a woman I loved dearly, also a doctoral student earlier together, came into the sacristy after I did my best with the text, and she said, James, very, very clever, but not convincing. I also remember this text being read. The other kind of group that you preach to every once in a while are members of your own family. They're also a very difficult group. My oldest sister and her husband, whom I like to refer to as the Catholics, they had 7 children, and they were all at a Mass where that text was read. So you can imagine the electricity in the immediate family. And my sister was there, my brother-in-law was there, and 5 of the 7 kids were lined up. And what we don't have in this particular text is the following. This follows in the scriptures. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for that is what is expected of you. Honor your father and your mother is the first commandment. At which point my brother-in-law and my sister both looked at the kids and went, The very next line, fathers, do not anger your children. Bring them up with training and instruction. And they all looked and they went, So this is a text that is bound to offend everyone. But really, it shouldn't. I read one scriptural scholar who said the very first sentence is important. Be subordinate to one another out of reverence for Christ. And he said the next sentence was part of it, instead of being split into 2. Wives, be subordinate to your husbands. Mutual subordination. That is, mutual subordination to Christ. This is not a gender issue. This is a commitment issue to Christ. And the suggestion of the reading is, if in fact people are truly committed to Christ, they're going to work out the issues they have to deal with. And I could go through this whole thing. I don't want to do it because it would just be clever and not convincing. But I do think that the text itself can rightly be understood as an effort to try to say, folks, if we're going to be able to pull things together, if we're going to be able to form a community, a lasting marriage, and so on, both people need to give themselves over to Christ, who is love, and then things will follow out in a way that they should. Third thing I want to mention has to do with decision and commitment. I'm sure that all of you, many of you, if not all of you, saw the story the last couple days about the people on the train in Belgium and the 2 Americans and the Brit who, in a moment of heroism, they said, go, and they did it. They did what needed to be done. They brought down this man that could have caused huge carnage. And these people are rightly seen for their heroism. You know, you say, what would you have done? I probably would have crawled under the bench or something. But this is what they did. And you end up saying, thank God they did it. I admire that. And I admire that. But I want to say to you, it's one thing, as one of the people that did this said, adrenaline took over. Some of us may have been in moments not that dramatic, but where adrenaline does take over and you just do what you need to do. But I would like to suggest to you that even more demanding is not the moment of decision. It's the moment of continuing commitment. There are people that can be faced with problems, chronic pain, difficult relationships, so on and so forth, and somehow they make it stay. They stay at the table, they continue to give, and so on. Unfortunately, we don't see that as powerfully a witness to the gospel, as a moment of real courage. And I think it's important to call that. The word commitment comes from Latin, mittere, mitto mittere, to send, and the prefix is cum, to send with someone. You don't know exactly where the journey is going to take you, but you pledge to make it together. You make vows because you don't always feel like it. You make a vow, a commitment like that. On Thursday, if you went to daily mass on Thursday, there was a story, it's called A Text of Terror from the book of Judges, where Jephthah wants to go fight the enemies, and he makes a pledge to the Lord, a vow. He says, if you allow me to defeat these people, when I return home victorious, whoever comes out the front door of my house, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering. And the first one out the door is his only daughter. And he sacrifices her. That is called a dumb vow. No one should make a vow like that. So the issue for all of us, I think, is to distinguish. A decision is important, especially if you procrastinate or float. And to make a decision, you don't have to know everything. In fact, you rarely ever know everything, especially when it comes to a question of what you're going to do with your life, especially when it comes to a question of what do you really believe. But the decision you can make, and that I would encourage every one of you to make this Sunday, is I decide to believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in Jesus Christ. Even if you might next say, but I'm not sure what it all means. Every time my students ask me at any point in class, they say, what exactly? I always stop them. Don't ask me for exactness. Ask me for understanding. So I think here this Sunday, we should have the courage not only to make a decision, but to make a commitment. Even when we don't understand everything, which is true about a lot of life. Let's make wise commitments. Let's keep them. Christ has committed himself to every one of us. We can surely reciprocate and do so with gratitude. Amen.